Today is Thursday, June 25th, 1992. I am Janice Kettler, interviewing Sig Schnell at his home in Portland, Oregon, for the Oregon Holocaust Resource Center Oral History Project. Also with us today, assisting with the camera and the interview, is Ron Applebaum. Good afternoon, Mr. Schnell.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to ask you to begin by telling us your full name, spelling, and the date and place of your birth.
Sig Schnell, S-I-G-S-C-H-N-E-L-L, born October 4th, 1922, in Stettin, S-T-E-T-T-I-N, Germany.
Okay. I'd like for you to tell us about your family, your parents, sisters, and brothers.
Well, I'm the only son. No sisters or brothers, father, mother, and from what period on? I mean, you want to...
From kind of as far back as you can remember. What it was like in your family, living where you lived.
Well...
What did your father do?
Father was a salesman traveling for spirituous liquor and cigars. That's what he sold. And he traveled in Germany, certain part. Mother was a housewife, as most women were in those days. And relatively easy time until about 1933, when Hitler came to power, and problems would arise, such as a traveling salesman, my father needed an identity card. And one of the first things that the German government would do is to cancel these cards so that Jewish people wouldn't travel around at will in Germany. So that caused a hardship, of course, on him, family, in the way of income. And eventually, he was out of work. By about 1937, I would say, for 4 years, we managed to live on savings. So, little business that he would do. And in 1937, the thing became critical. And someone, I will come to that later, I think was the arranger of this. There was a project of ditch digging, perhaps an hour from our hometown, by the local government, and they would somehow hire Jewish people. And my father got the job together with my uncle, and they worked there at least for a year and a half. And the interesting thing was, when the Crystal Night came on November of 1938, none of these people that worked in that ditch digging development, say, was arrested or put in a concentration camp. As we found out later, this was due in part to one man who happened to be Jewish. It's quite a story. My dad, in spite of the fact that his income wasn't all that good, he loved to play cards, poker. And they had a certain group of people, 4 or 5, 6 perhaps, met in a Jewish restaurant, of which there were 2 in our town, about once or twice a week. How well I know that? Because I used to come over there to pick him up and have it kibbutz. One of the participants was a man by the name of Paul Hirschfeld, who showed up dressed like he came out of a magazine. The old Borsalino hat, a cane in the right hand, and one glove on and the other one holding the cane. That was the proper way to carry yourself, and you didn't need the cane, but cane was just there to make a better impression. This man would participate in that game, and sometime he'd leave earlier, and he knew my father well, and they talked to each other by their first name. In other words, you rather than Sir or Mr. or Max or Paul. So I know what the reason was for this. So they would ask my father, "You know this man, what does he do for a living?" Dressed like $1 million, nobody knows what he's doing. My father said, "Look, we are getting together here, we are playing, and it was obvious in those days you pulled out your wallet and you put your money on the table to show that you had money in your pocket to play the game." He did that like anybody else, and he says, "As far as I know." Well, as it turned out, when the temple burned, the basement was out of brick. It's the only thing that stayed. That basement was converted into an office. And for some strange reason, by order of the German secret police, Paul Hirschfeld was in charge of this office. What was he doing there? The neighborhood of Stettin, which is about the size of Portland, 360,000 inhabitants, had a lot of small towns. And in those small towns would live one family, Jewish, two families. And anti-Semitism there was, of course, rather severe, and these people couldn't live anymore where they were. And they came to town to see this man, to see if he can transfer them to Stettin or some other big town, and he would do that. And he still showed up for the poker game, what he said a word, people didn't dare. So here comes the crystal night, and I worked at age 15 and a half, I remember, in the lawyer's office. Jewish lawyer could not have any non-Jewish people working for him. So he petitioned the school that I went to, and I was let go before graduation, about 6 months, to be in his office and go to school and learn stenography and typewriter. They had a special school for that. He paid for it, and I worked in his office. This crystal night, the next morning, the first thing that happened, we were living in an apartment building, all Jewish people. Somebody knocks on the door, and I go and open it, and there's a man from the secret police and a policeman. They're asking for one of the tenants by name of Hoffman, who lived next door. And my father happened to hear someone at the door, and he came and they asked him, "Are you Hoffman?" He said, "No." So they went to see the neighbor, and all of a sudden the neighbor's wife comes in crying, "Do you have any boxes or paper?" What for? Well, they're taking files and taking this and that, and so apparently they're taking my husband along. And we were alerted that there was something going on. The synagogue was on fire. In Germany, you order rolls, fresh hard rolls, and they come every morning, a dozen or half a dozen. A lady would put them in a little bag, a sack that you had hanging at the door. She put the rolls in there, and she knocked on the door that morning because she knew everybody, and said, "I just want you to know, the synagogue, which was 10 minutes from us, is on fire." He said, "Oh my God." So anyway, that settled this thing. They took this Mr. Hoffman, and I decided to go to the office because I didn't know. I said anything. My parents were not too happy about that idea. So I went and I passed by the synagogue. It was burning, fire truck standing there, no help. Hundreds and hundreds of people. And I stood there for a moment, was rather tragic thing. Two Catholic nuns in their garments standing there, and I heard them, I happened to be right behind them, and they said, anybody that does this to others will not survive, for sure. I mean, it's a statement where you could be hanged. So anyway, I left, I went to the office. I'm in that office about 10 minutes, and in comes the secret police and a policeman asking for my boss. I had no idea. I said, I don't know, he's over at the court, perhaps. Well, we'll just wait then. And so I said, can I take the mail in? He says, bring the mail in, let me see it. I looked at the mail. He says, fine, you can go ahead and work. So a man from the secret police had one eye, this I remember. Policeman uniform, he stood by the window. Time goes pretty soon. And I said, well, it was kind of an awkward situation. I didn't know what the heck is going on. And I said, what are we going to do now? Well, so the man says, let's close the office and we'll go over to his residence. All right. They close the office. I give him the key. He gives the key back to me. And I said, now when can I go back to work? He says, I tell you what, tomorrow or the day after, you come over to Gestapo headquarters and you will get your instructions when to go back to work. I went down the stairs, these fellows behind me, and on the street I see the neighbor lady, Mrs. Hoffman, and she says, my God, what are you doing on the street? They're arresting people. My son is arrested, 16 years old. Your parents are beside them, that you better get home. And I said, what are you talking about? They were just in the office. Nobody touched me. I come home, and my parents read me the riot act. We told you not to go, and you know what happened when I told them that they were in our office. So anyway, stayed home, no contact. The evening, this is the 10th of November. In the meantime, I find out through courier, or I know what, that my boss was already in a concentration camp in Sachsenhausen near Berlin. They took him in the morning. These fellows that came to the office, they didn't apparently know about it. I mean, this was one of those actions. So the next day, the 11th, things are calming down. I think it was the propaganda minister on the radio saying the action is over and he wants people to be quiet and this and that. And either rumors or whatever it was, I can't remember exactly, that Paul Hirschfeld would be able to get people out of the concentration camp as a Jew. And I took off from the house. I looked like King Farouk, with sunglasses, hat on, collar up, and I went over to her house. And she is crying. And I said, look, Mrs. Auerbach, that was her name, let's go and see Paul Hirschfeld. She says, they're a gangster, a bandit, no good. You call him whatever you want. I know him. My father knows him. Let's go down to the synagogue. You talk to him. I have no idea what's going to happen. But we go. We get into that office, and there are all kinds of people there for other reasons, whatever. And they had a bouncer, as I called it. And it so happened the bouncer, Jewish, his son and I were bar mitzvah on the same day. So he sees us come in, makes his hand, what can we do? And I told him, in the meantime, people get up from their seat. They think there's something going on. We're going to go ahead of them. He says, you sit down. I'm running the show here. Whatever I say goes. So I said, this is my boss's wife. She wants to see Paul Hirschfeld. All right, you're sitting down. Pretty soon, it's our turn. The door opens, and behind a big desk sits Paul Hirschfeld. He gets up, we shake hands, I introduce him, I go out. I wait half an hour. All of a sudden, lady comes out crying, can't believe it, impossible, that's what he said. A train is coming like every night at 8 o'clock from Berlin, which was like Portland Olympia from our town. Tomorrow night on that train, my husband is going to be released from the camp. All right? She said, I don't believe it, the guy's no good. Incidentally, I never asked her how much money that cost her, because I'm sure it wasn't cheap. I said, the next day, let's go to the train station. Take a look when the train comes in. The train rolls in at 8 o'clock. You don't know which wagon he's in. Pretty soon we see somebody, no hair. That was the sign. I mean, that's the first thing they did. They took all the hair off the cap. He comes out of the train. Released. Good. All right. Now, in the meantime, this card game still goes on. I'm up there not every day, but kibitz. About November or December of 38. No, not November, probably December, January 39. My father comes home from the game one day and he says, you know what? We are going to Shanghai. My mother said, what? Shanghai? People eat rice and drink tea. That's all we know. Yeah? He is Paul Hirschfeld is chartering a ship to go to Shanghai from Hamburg. And he wants us and my uncle to come to the office in the morning to sign up for this transport. My father went, we didn't go, and his brother. And he said, by the way, for you, because of our long friendship, I will pay for the trip. And I will pay for the moving and storage people to pack all your things at home and ship them off to Shanghai. And in those days, a man from the, what's it called? People that bring in, not contraband, but merchandise, and you have to declare it. A customs, that's it, customs official. A customs official was present when these things were packed to be sure that you're not taking any silver, gold, valuables, stamps out of the country. The only thing my mother did, and it was unusual to get that permission, we left Germany on the 25th of April, 1939. And on the 26th, the next day, the parents had silver wedding anniversary. So she asked, she had a cake baked for that occasion to take it on the ship. We know of cases where the customs officer would cut that cake to see if there's something in there. He said, here's a cake, put it in a box. That man from the customs spent most of his time at the window looking out. That's the way things were. Now, back for a moment, my going to Gestapo headquarters for permission. I told my parents, and they said, you must be out of your mind. They arrested people. I said, the action is over. According to the government, I'm going to take my boss's wife along, we'll go. And the Gestapo headquarters was in the Beneberis Lodge building. See, that was the first thing that they did. Hitler closed all any lodges, anything, there were secret meetings or behind the black curtain. They were closed and the secret police took over all the offices. So we go up there and a man, about the size of Ron, comes out, still in his clothes, shakes hands, how are you? And I said, well, my name is such and such, and I'm working in a lawyer's office, and by then, by decree of the German government, the law offices, Jewish law offices, had to be closed by the end of 1938. And I said, because of that, I'm told by the man who came up to our office to see you for permission to go and work. He says, let me see. Today, no, let's make it tomorrow. You can go to the office. Here's my card. He gives me his business card. He says, if anybody bothers you, anything happens, you call that number. Bye. We went. I went to the office the next day, and it's 2 hours for lunch, and I let the blinds down because the sun would come in, and then at noon, in the afternoon, when I come back, I pull up the blinds and find Dandy. I come back to the office, I pull up the blind, and down below, we were up on, maybe 6th or 7th floor, is a streetcar stop. And I happened to look down there, and there's that Gestapo agent with the one eye, looking up. The shade fell out of my hand, and I run over to the phone. And looking at that door to open, I was going to get to that phone. That door never opened. That man never showed up. It just happened to be that he was down there at the same time. I worked that office. Nobody bothered me until my boss was released. And then we wound up the affairs. Now, everything is packed in the house for us to go to Shanghai. We are going to the train station, and Paul Hirschfeld comes along on that train. We go to Hamburg, we stay in a hotel overnight, next morning we go to the ship. Paul Hirschfeld comes along to see that everything's all right. With my father, he said goodbye like a Russian bear hug. And I remember my father saying, Paul, why can't you come along on this trip? And Paul Hirschfeld said, Max, I have things to do here. I'm needed. That's why I can't come. Right. So we left on that ship, and it was 69 days around Cape of Good Hope to Shanghai. Now, for a moment, speaking of Paul Hirschfeld, about 41, I think it was, either 40 or 41, the governor of the province of Pomerania, which the team belonged to, issued an edict that all Jewish people have to be deported to Lublin, Poland, within 48 hours or something. And in Israel is a small number of Jews from my hometown, and one of them wrote a book. And the name Paul Hirschfeld is mentioned in there as follows. When that edict was published, Paul Hirschfeld was on official business in Berlin. Had he been in town at the time, he would have been able to stop the deportation of the Jews from Stettin. How did he wind up? He was in Lublin, eventually, like anybody else, murdered by the secret police because he knew too much. That's the end of that. So that was the story of Paul Hirschfeld, and our luck that we were safe to leave Germany, and there were a few hundred people on that ship.
A few hundred Jews?
Yeah, all Jews.
Anybody else on that ship?
Only Jews and a German crew. And the reason for the 69-day journey around Cape of Good Hope was we were flying the swastika, and the British had forbidden any ships to go to the Suez Canal flying the emblem of the Third Reich. So therefore we had to go that way. So
maybe I can back up a little and
Yeah.
ask you some more questions
Sure.
about your life before Hitler came to power.
well,
In Stettin, I'd like to get your mother's full name, and your
yeah,
father's name is Max.
yeah. Father's name is Max, and the mother's name is Johanna.
Oh, do you know her maiden name?
Eik, E-I-C-K.
E-I-C-K.
Right.
And what about their parents?
Her mother, we have a picture there you can see later on, died early. She was an orphan and was raised by an uncle and aunt. I don't know what happened to her father. I don't know. No. My father's parents, because they died, and large family. And strangely enough, because I have very little hair left, and so does Ron, I see. My father was bald at age 30 and shaved his head like Jordan, you know. And all the brothers were in the same boat. They all lost their hair at an early age.
How about his father?
Father had a full head of hair. Father was one of those, his father was, there used to be in what they call artillery regiment. This is under the Kaiser. And the commander was Papa Wrangel, heck of a name. And this grandfather of mine was a sworn-in soldier of the German Empire. I mean, he had the Kaiser's pictures I'm told, in the house, and when people came in, he would take the kids on their arm and say, "You tell the men who that is," and they go, "The Kaiser," and this and that. That was a big deal. Because German Jews, you know, in those days, I mean, you were German first and Jew second. I mean, who expected that to happen? In fact, when I said goodbye to some of our friends in Germany, in Stettin, leaving town, they said, "Who in the world wants to go to Shanghai? My God, there must be other places," because there were Madagascar, Trinidad. U.S. we couldn't go because we didn't have the affidavit, you see.
What about Palestine?
We're not too interested in Palestine. Besides, you needed in those days, I believe, 2,500 pounds money per person. We didn't have that kind of money. See, because Shanghai would let the people in. Article in this paper says no passport. That's not true. You had to have a passport. But no money, because the American Joint Distribution Committee was in Shanghai taking care of people over 20,000. You heard that story before. I'm not taking anything new. And so Shanghai was the obvious place. Well, anyway, these friends in our hometown, they would say, "My God, I don't think it's as bad as German Jews as you people make it." "Oh no, why is that?" "Well, look at the Anschluss in Austria. Hitler took that, and the Jews were finished inside a week. In concentration camps, lost their business, lost their life. Did this happen to German Jews? This is 1938, 5 years after the Third Reich. We are still around." I said, "Well, it's our desire to leave," and so, and all those people were deported and lost their life, of course. But that shows you the mentality of the German Jews. And there were a lot of them that did that, including us. I mean, it took an act of Congress, frankly, for my father and my mother in particular to go. Well, you can imagine the older people. Let me see, in 30... She was born in 83, so it makes her 17, 47, 56. And father was 57. You're not young people anymore to leave everything, leave your home, leave your friends.
What other family was there? What happened with all of your father's brothers?
Brother, the one in Stettin, he came along.
Where was
Yeah.
the rest of the family?
The rest of them were, one of them was in Palestine, one of them was already in Texas, and a sister was in Theresienstadt, and she lived to come out and came to Portland. She died here. And another sister and her daughter were murdered by the Germans because they lived in Poland. Yeah. So when you ask me what was the life before that, let me see. I was born 22. Hitler came to power in 33. I was 11 years old.
What do you remember about that?
the only thing I remember is we were watching the elections, which were plenty almost every 2-3 months, because the government in power before Hitler couldn't hold itself because of the Nazis stirring up trouble. So you could see every election there would be more votes for the National Socialist Party. So that eventually Hindenburg, I guess, had no choice but to appoint him chancellor. But our life was fairly pleasant. I mean, mother goes around the coffee clutch with other ladies, they meet in a restaurant, I go along and meet the other ladies, and we talk, and they come to the house. I went to school, of course, no problem. And I didn't even have a problem after 33 going to school.
Was your family religious?
Yes, but not kosher. But they observed the holidays, go to synagogue and everything.
And you had a bar mitzvah?
And I had bar mitzvah, 1935, on November 9th, believe it or not. So this bouncer I was telling you about, I was bar mitzvah together with his son. And beautiful synagogue, by the way. Very beautiful cantor. That's why when I came to this country, different melodies to begin with, all foreign to me. He had a voice like Jan Pierce and Richard Tucker combined. And beautiful House of God, where I would say that in Portland, only the temple reminds me as the House of God, for what I know, compared to Neve Sholom, Shah Torah. I mean, that's my own opinion. But the life itself, even after the Third Reich, what school is concerned, I had no problem whatsoever. I was the only Jew there, I thought, until by sheer coincidence, it turns out someone in Seattle, whom I met 10 or 15 years ago, went to that same school, and we did not know each other.
Was the synagogue that your family went to the one that was burned?
Yeah. There was actually, as I remember, as big as the city was, I think there was one other Orthodox small shul, like Kesa Israel here, perhaps. But that synagogue we had would hold all the Jewish people that wanted to go.
How many were in the town?
How many were in the town? I have no idea. I'm just guessing. 6,000, 8,000 perhaps. Now, don't forget, not all of them will go to synagogue. And it was a synagogue that was not necessarily Orthodox. In that sense, it had an organ. But a non-Jew who would play the organ, because Jewish people are not allowed in the synagogue to perform services. But the women sat upstairs, you see, and downstairs. And we children, in other words, you face the synagogue this way, the women in the balcony, and the children are on the side. We are facing the side. We couldn't sit with the parents. No way. We had the shamans there who would say, shh, we don't talk during service and so forth. And that was it. Beautiful, beautiful synagogue, beautiful service. And interesting enough, and I'm only speaking now my time after the Third Reich, no problem in school. The flag was raised on occasions in the school grounds. People raised their hands. I had special permission to keep my hand down. We had in a class, I think they were either must have been Jehovah's Witness, what they called over there, different name for that. They were not members of the Hitler Youth, because their belief would not allow them to do that. the teacher had the obligation maybe once a week to say, who in the class is not a member of the Hitler Youth? I get up, so do the other two people. He says to me, Schnell, you sit down. Because he knew very well there was no reason for me, I couldn't be a member of Hitler Youth if I wanted to. Then he quizzes these other kids. What happened? You talk to your parents, why not? And so, little chicaneries, Not too bad. Like I say, I had no problem at all. I sat down immediately. Also, we had once a week at least religious hour about certainly not Judaism but Christianity, and these children from Jehovah's Witness and myself, we were excused from that our school, so we go to one of the fellows' house nearby and we stayed there and spent an hour, then we go back to school afterwards. Yeah, they would let us do that. And then I remember, when you say little episodes, in Germany, I know if it's in other countries too, you have a teacher parading up and down the entrance hall so that there's no monkey business of any kind. And one of the men would parade there used to be a member of the German steel helmets before Hitler. This was a rightist party already. They were opposed to the fact that Germany lost the war and subject to the Versailles Treaty and all these derogatory things that they claim. So they were the so-called steel helmets. And when Hitler came to power, they were the first ones to join the brown shirts. Welcomed open arms. And this man, in full uniform, would parade up and down that hallway every now and then. I would come in and I would raise my hand without saying anything, just to say hello, because you had to do that.
How would you raise your hand? Sure.
I raised my hand like this. Oh yeah, but didn't say anything. So, it was a foregone conclusion. Nobody said yes, or you can't, or no, or you're Jewish. Who I said that? It's unwritten law. Where he lived was a well-known outdoor restaurant. For Sunday, people go there playing cards, not poker, but something else. My parents would go, they meet other Jewish people, they have coffee and cake, and I would go over to their house because the son and I were good friends. I knock on the door and the father opens the door in full uniform. Brown shirt and all, come on in. Perfect, no problem. I played with his son, and we were the best of friends. But that shows you, how things will go at times. And
What about your father's parents? Did you know them?
no, I don't think I vaguely remember, but I wouldn't say that I knew them. They lived far away. They lived in Poland. Yeah, which was then Poland after the Versailles Treaty, 1922. You see, that is why my father was born in Germany, which went to Poland in 1922. Consequently, for the American system, he was under Polish quota. My mother and I were born in Germany, which is Poland after 45, but we were still on the German quota. So when it came time to leave Shanghai, I only bring this up for the moment because it ties in with that, we could leave. My father had to stay behind. You see, he got the Polish quota.
Well, did his parents die?
His parents
When
died
you were
natural
young?
death. Natural death, yeah.
And you said that your mother's mother died when she was very young. And
Very young, yeah. She was, I don't know, young girl. I don't know how old she was.
She did not have sisters or brothers?
She had two brothers, yes. And one of them died and the other one was in Shanghai. But he couldn't get into the United States because he had tuberculosis. So he went to Palestine, to Israel then, and he died there. And his son, he has one son who lives in Detroit, and we are in contact every once in a while, Yeah. And
Now, what was your full name at birth?
Siegfried,
Siegfried?
yeah. Both ways, Siegfried, strictly from the Wagnerian opera.
And the
So,
last name was the same?
the last name is the
Always
same, yeah. I prefer actually to go under the name of Siggy. I neglected to make that official, but I'm trying unofficially to be called Siggy rather than Sig.
And how do you spell Siggy?
S-I-G-I. Yeah, a lot easier.
Was your father or their friends involved in any political groups? This is before 1933. Were they involved in politics in any way?
He may have been a member of the Social Democratic Party, and but nothing in any capacity to be active or so. He was just a member, and that was it.
What about, you said the apartment building was all Jews.
Yeah.
What about the neighborhood?
Gentile, all Gentile. It was on the main street in Stettin, where there were department stores, business, and all that. And this building used to belong to a Jewish merchant who, I believe, vacated it because he left the country. And incidentally, that was already the arrangement by Paul Hirschfeld to have that apartment exclusively for Jews. And so he would move people in there from these small towns, in the neighborhood, yeah. So he had a tremendous hand in saving people. I mean, just picture that as a Jew, you are able to get somebody out of a concentration camp by telling his wife 24 hours in advance, tomorrow evening the train comes in, your husband will be on that train. I mean, you have to know almost Hitler personally or somebody to make that kind of statement. That's exactly what happened. Yeah. And yet, in private or talking to my father, the nicest person, helpful, very friendly, and shake hands and what have you. I mean, you would have never thought that was possible. In fact, I went back to my hometown in '74, first time, because a Jewish man, stamp collector, advertised in an Israel paper to exchange stamps. Correspondence in German, Russian, Polish, Hebrew, and Yiddish. And I wrote to him, of course, in German. And he writes me back in German. He's a Polish Jew, fought the Germans under the Russian army, was demobilized in Siberia, and they were the first ones to come to our town as the new inhabitants, you might say. And he says, when we came into your town, rats were the only thing we saw. No Germans, no life, nothing. A completely ghost city, you might say. And he says, occasionally it was on the River Oder, a bridge would lead to East Germany at that time. And the Germans had an organization which called the Werwolf, which was the last resort, to say, to defend the Third Reich. And he said there were occasions when these people come over the bridge and try and throw Molotov cocktails in their houses where they used to live and so forth. So through him I found out the synagogue, what is there now, there's an apartment house, and all this time in the correspondence he would say, I cannot get out of Poland, but you go to Germany to see your brother-in-law. Why don't you come and visit? And by God, in 1974, I was in Israel on a mission for the Federation, and I went to my hometown and met him for the first time, told him my experience with Paul Hirschfeld, and he says, you know what, we have to go to the Jewish community. Tomorrow I have to pick up Matzos, and it was close to Pesach. I want you to meet the president of the congregation, small, they're not many Jews. You tell him that story for Paul Hirschfeld that happened in this city. And I went there and I had to talk Yiddish and German because he didn't understand English, I don't speak Polish. And the man, by the time I was through, he just went back in his chair. He says, I can't believe it happened in the city. That's right. Man lived in the city, and we are thankful that he was here because he saved our life.
Is it still called the same city? Is it the same name?
Called Sechin. It's, let's see, SCZECIN.
Sechin, Poland.
Sechin, Poland, right.
And you said it was about maybe an hour and a half or so away from
Berlin, yeah. It's like Portland, Olympia, same distance.
And where else, geographically, where is it?
It'd be it'd be south of Stettin. See, Stettin is on the Baltic up north,
okay.
right. In other words, it faces, in a way, Sweden, Denmark, you go there by hydrofoil. So, Berlin was south of the city, you see. Yeah.
You want to keep going?
Well, you asked me the next question.
Okay. I'm still back in,
Yeah.
in the 30s.
All right.
And wondering, you were about 11 years old
Right.
in 1933, and we talked about when Hitler came to power. Do you remember, when did you first hear of Hitler? And were people afraid?
Yeah.
Was there any...
Well, people were afraid, let's say 2-3 years prior to that. I remember an incident now that you mention it. Let me see, you call that... Like Costco, for instance, where you go and buy big quantities. Only this was a smaller place for housewives. And that's where you buy fresh butter and fresh eggs compared to maybe refrigerated items in the grocery store. They would pride themselves on having only fresh merchandise, nothing is refrigerated. And my mother would go there quite often to buy, and I went along. And one day there was a demonstration out on the street. Brown shirts chasing communists. And the police stood idly by and wouldn't arrest them at all. They would arrest the communists, but not the brown shirts. And it was a rather scary thing. They closed the door, the shop, and nobody could go out, nobody came in. You looked at that and you saw the police in their wagons and the sirens and people hitting each other with sticks. Open, brown uniform, swastika flag. Although in those days the government, and of course at that time I know it was a former general who was in charge, like Prime Minister, there was an order for the brown shirts not to wear their uniform, not to antagonize people. They would do that to the spite. No, what is they go on the street, openly uniforms, police wouldn't do a thing, and we thought to ourselves right then and there, boy, if these people ever came to power, we know very well what's going to happen.
What year was that, do you think?
It used to be about 31, 32.
So you remember your family talking about that?
Oh, yeah.
So there was fear.
There was fear. I mean, not actual fear. I wouldn't say fear. There was apprehension, not knowing what's going to happen. Don't forget, German Jews were still... there were some that wore the Iron Cross from the First World War. They said, nobody's going to touch me with the Iron Cross. And some of these people were exempted from concentration camp, from closing business for a while. Hitler came to power in 33, about 34, 35. If you were a member of the armed forces in the First World War and you had the Iron Cross, you were able to keep your store open for a while. But this was all local. In other words, it didn't come from the higher ups. It was just something that, a present, you might say. So thinking about those things, German Jews would say, well, so when he came to power, there were people that said, well, as fast as he came to power, he's probably going to disappear. This can't hold up, because people wouldn't stand for that. The only reason and the only thing they forgot is the man obviously took advantage of the situation. Germany was in shambles. They owed money to everybody. The country was divided. You had occupation forces all over the country. Unemployment, soup kitchens. People sold apples on the street for a living. And that man got up before an audience and said, all these bad things I'm going to change. You give me your vote, and I will see to it that you're going to have a job, and a house to live, and things to eat, and you don't have to sell apples on the street for a living. So, and we thought, well, obviously we're not going to vote for him because we are not selling apples on the street and all that. But there are enough people around, and Germans, as culture-minded as they are, music-minded, they wouldn't be led into something like that. No way. The man will come and go, just like some of the other prime ministers since the Weimar Republic of 1925 or 26. But that was not the case.
Was the anti-Jewish position known?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The anti-Jewish position was known, but again, we were looking kind of at America, in a way, mighty country. They're trading with Germany. They're not going to go for this, and they're going to tell Germany, look, you better slow down. After all, these are people like anybody else, and they lived in your country, they fought in your army, they fought to defend Germany in the First World War. What do you want? Well, didn't mean a thing. No.
Was your father in the First World War?
No. Yeah, oh yeah. Father's in the First World War. However, not on the front. He was in the supporting area. But my uncle, he had the Iron Cross second class. He was fighting in France and so forth. And that was another thing in Hitler's favor, unfortunately. When the troops came home in 1918, including my uncle, they had what was called Spartacus. It was a communist-led regime. Unfortunately, a Jewish person, well known by name of Rosa Luxemburg, was well known in communist circles, was a member of the Spartacus. They would spit on the soldiers. They cuss them out. They come back fighting for years in the front against France. And people thought, that's the kind of reception we get. It's almost like Vietnam, you know, when the war was over in this country against Vietnam. So, in others, this was something else that people did not forget. And he would use that in his speeches and say, you remember when you came home from the war, the greeting you received? The people spat on you and everything. So, I mean, these were all things he had it all written down. You know exactly what he was going to say. And the Germans, let's face it, I mean, the bulk of them out of work, hungry, dilapidated. He said, it's almost like now with Ross Perot. I hear people say, Bush, Clinton. No, I don't think. Let's try something new. Let's go with a man that doesn't say how he's going to do this or what he's going to do there. Let's try him out. He's only a human being. We probably can recall him if he's not doing any good. That is almost the same thing with Hitler at the time, because they must have had 15 or 20 different parties, Social Democrats, Communists, that needed your votes. And you could just see it, like I said before, in every election. National Socialist Party would get more votes. So my father said, "What is this going to be it?" And it was.
Do you think your father was thinking about leaving much earlier than
No,
when you
no,
left?
no. He wouldn't leave. I mean, to begin with, leaving where people go to America, they had relatives, they got nephew Davis support. All right, they left. Some people had money, would go to Palestine. We didn't have that money. So where else would you go? We had a Jewish newspaper came from Frankfurt. People would advertise and give, so to speak, their left arm to get a passage on a ship. Like if you had a passage to go to Madagascar, they'd pay you for the passage plus you name it, if you would sell them that ticket. Well, some people did that too. Made extra money, plenty. So the choice where to go, Madagascar, like I mentioned before, Trinidad, Cuba. I mean, these were all countries and had certain restrictions. Like Rus, for instance, went to Bolivia. Well, you had to sign up to become a farmer or something. And my father had no idea about farming, so he said, "I'm not going to lie and fill out the papers and make a fool of myself." So where would you go? And there was always the hope that things will relax and they may not be as bad, he might change his mind. And yet you could see that things were going from bad to worse.
When do you think he realized that things were not going to get better?
At the crystal night, yes.
What do you remember about the night? You talked about the day after.
Yeah.
Were you aware of what was happening
No.
in the evening?
No.
You only
The first time I heard was from that lady that bought the hot rolls. She knocked on the door and says, "By the way, you probably know what happened. I just want you to know the synagogue is on fire." And we heard on the radio that a Jew had killed the German ambassador in France. So now, of course, it turns out that's not the case. It was just put on deal by the German government. But in 1937, I remember, and again, my parents probably didn't think much. It was a very, very fair warning. A man by name of Wilhelm Gustloff. He was a German, I believe, in Switzerland. And the party had their functionaries all over Europe to antagonize people and spread the evil of fascism. This man was assassinated, and I think by a Jewish person. They brought his body back to Germany for burial, and it was something like Arlington National Cemetery, and then some. And Hitler spoke, and this was in 1937, he said, "If this happens once again, that a Jew assassinates one of our people, the whole Jewish people in Germany are going to pay for that." That was the warning in 1937. And we used to talk about it, and again, people say, "Well, the man talks, you know how he is, he speaks for hours." And this is another one of his methods and schemes. And of course, I know if you know the penalty of the Kristall Night, the assassination for the Jewish people in Germany, I know if you know that, nobody told you. Number one, if you leave the country, or if you left the country after that, you had to pay a tax. And that's another thing. Number one, we didn't have the money to pay taxes. We were exempt from that. Paul Hirschfeld fixed all this up. Number two, all gold and silver, except your wedding ring and the religious utensils like your Kiddush cup and your candelabra you could keep. Everything else had to be turned into the German government as penalty. My father, our city was on the river Oder, and fish.
What was the river?
Oder, O-D-E-R, and fish was a well-known food over there and sold fresh right on the river by all kinds of people, men, women. My father had a friend who was a communist before, even then, I don't know. One day he goes over there to buy some fish, and the man, of course, knew what's going on. He says, by the way, Max, I'm just telling you this for what it's worth. You can trust me. If anybody wants to sell gold and silver to me, I will pay the full price and not say a word about it, rather than give it to those bandits for a song. My father had, because some people would do it for all the tea in China, but my father had quite a few people that said, all right, we know you, we don't know what's going on. I don't know where they met at night in the house or what. My father sold for people quite a bit of gold and silver and got a good price for them. And that man bought this out of the goodness of his heart, so to speak. Yeah. This I can't see you people giving that to the government and get a slip of paper.
In your family, did your parents talk openly with you about what was happening?
Yeah, oh yeah. Kind of in a low key. I mean, it was discussed, all right, but it was a well-known fact, and we lived there, and we had to obey, and you have no other choice but to sit it out and hope for the best that nothing is going to happen. And
did you have to wear yellow armor?
No, not yet. No, we didn't. No, this came about, I think, after the war broke out. You see, we left in April, and the war broke out in September of 39. I think it was either 39 or 40. No, we had the only thing we had, and unfortunately I don't know where the passport is. In our passport, we had to surrender that to police station. They put the J in there. And also when we left, each one leaving Germany, Jewish, I know about other people, was allowed to take along 4 American dollars. That is all. And we got American dollars from the bank against German money. That's all the money we took out. Now, some people, you got to be clever and you take matters in your own hand, obviously. They got a certificate from a doctor that they had hemorrhoids and they needed a special toilet tissue. And they bought several rolls. I know this for a fact. They unwound the roll down to the core, put money in and gold rings and wound the paper up exactly like that and all. And the customs officer sees that toilet paper and he says, what's the toilet paper for? He says, here's this. He's a doctor. All right, good. But can you imagine the chances people would take? Now, I want to give you an idea. The conditions in Shanghai, which you probably know, were such. You're very poor. You live from the Jewish Welfare Board, and the food was done to brag about. So you had to substitute in order to do that. You had to sell this, the cigarette lighter in the crystal vase. My parents had to sell their golden wedding rings in order to live. In 1946, I got a job in Shanghai with an American company as an auto mechanic, and I made enough money, and for their 40th wedding, let me see, 39, let's see, they met in 14, they met in 1914, so it'd be 30 years, 44, No, it was the 35th wedding anniversary. I bought gold rings back for them, made in Germany. The woman 18 karat gold, the man 14. That was a symbol. And I went to some people that were in our town and they had a pawn shop. Very rich people. I don't know what all they took out. I went to them, I called them, I said, do you by chance, they were dealing in that business in Shanghai, do you by chance have German-made weddings? Sure. So I went over to their house, and actually they were rich people. I said, how in the world did he? Says, well, he took her out of Germany, we're not going to tell you how, but he did. Those rings, I still have them downstairs, because when parents died, we took the rings as remembrance. But her ring is stamped 18 karat and his 14. Yeah. But I only bring this up to show you the chances people took, you see. They would do that.
You had some knowledge of the concentration camps because
Yes.
the boss was taken.
The boss was taken,
What
and
did you really hear? Were there rumors about what was going on?
nobody would talk. Nobody speaks. When they left the camp, they were told by the secret police, you keep your mouth shut. We have a long arm to reach for you. We don't want anything of this to go anywhere. And people were so frightened and glad that they got out of the camp that they wouldn't talk for all the tea in China, no matter what happened. Moreover, some of them had to leave the country within a month, a day or two. Now, I don't know if you remember, my wife saw that she showed that paper from the camp. He had on the back, he had to go to a police station. I know, depending on the case. In our town every day, they stamped the date in there, the police station. But you only had so many days to report, because your final deal was when you are released from the camp, you better leave the country, we don't want you here. Now, of course, remember, we didn't have that problem because none of us was in a concentration camp. So we decided, as I say, Crystal Night, this is it. In fact, Paul Hirschfeld, when he approached my father at the end of the poker game, he would say to him, you and I know that there's no place for Jewish people in this country anymore. I want you, your family, and your brother to leave. That was his word.
Did he have any family?
He had his wife, and he had a daughter, and he had, I think, his sister and a son. And the sister and the son were also on that boat. But his wife, of course, she stayed with him. And interesting enough, not this has anything to do with the case, but his nephew apparently had something going on with some girls there or some illegal, and of course Germany was dynamite on those things. It's not like here where you get off a $50 fine. The crew was German, the camp was German. The man was in iron chains practically all of the trip. It was nothing. Paul Hirschfeld wasn't there, and he did something, whatever happened there, I don't know, but I know he was in chains. Yeah, and of course nobody dared to ask what happened to him or where is he. Heavens, you're on a German ship, you're in a German jurisdiction, so you don't say anything. I mean, they were nice, and they were friendly, and you ate, you had good food, and good treatment. Nobody would say anything anti-Semitic or what. It was strictly business.
Did you know the people on the boat?
Some.
Any friends of yours?
That are still here.
No, that were on that boat. You were.
Yeah,
How
well,
old were you?
I was 16.
16.
16, yeah. A man, a young, his father, when I was in a lawyer's office, there was another lawyer, Jewish, not much business. He was on that boat with his son, but he was also a friend of Paul Hirschfeld. So he got out, you see. Yeah. You either had to be a friend of his or you had to know, I know exactly what the city, there weren't too many people from our town, I know, on that boat. Later on in Hamburg, there were different Jewish people I know, whether he had anything to do with how they came, but from our town, nobody. But imagine my feeling when in 74 from East Berlin I took a train to go back to my hometown, and I arrived at that same train station where I left in 39. Yeah, funny feeling. So, could we stop for...
So tell us